Marcus Lovett was always older. His age, both in years and in maturity, would have varied impacts on his life. Particularly, during the Second World War, his age and family life would keep him out of the conflict. But midway through, he too would find himself in uniform, and as a man among boys. He was born on August 13th, 1911, in Haddonfield, New Jersey, the third of 5 children. The family was poor, and after the death of his father in 1927, Marcus dropped out of high school so he and his older brother, Charles, could take care of the family. He worked a number of odd jobs before deciding to become a salesman. He went store to store, painting or pasting crate paper in windows for Lucas Paints, and later Kellogg's cereal. In 1928, he met and impregnated my great-grandmother, Marina Machado. As a result, they married and subsequently gave birth to my grandfather, Gentry. Both were only 18 years old. But Marcus was lucky. A few years later, he bought a small home and was able to keep his job through the Depression. As he approached his 30s and fathered 2 more children, he worked the same job, day in and day out, advertising cereal. But world events would soon interfere. The Japanese conquests of Manchuria and China were making ripples in world politics in the 1930s, and the rise of Adolf Hitler and the invasion of Poland in 1939 made situations tense, to say the least. In response, the U.S., in September 1940, passed the Selective Training and Service Act, requiring all men aged 21 to 35 to sign up for the draft. Marcus was one of them.
Congress passed the Selective Service Act. For the first time in our history, we began mobilizing an army while still at peace.
The first number is serial number 158.
But Marcus's situation was different. With 4 dependents, 3 children, and a wife at home, his number was less likely to have been called up. But after the United States' official entry into the war, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor in December 1941, and the battles of 1942 and early 1943, the body count began to rise, and the United States began to dip into her reserves. By late 1943, with no immediate end to the war in sight, Marcus saw his number coming up. Children or not, the military needed replacements. His oldest son, Gentry, was 15 years old at the time. It wouldn't be long until he too would be subject for service. "I would rather go than have Gent have to go," Marcus said. Furthermore, the service was an opportunity to leave his monotonous salesman job and experience something new. It was a combination of these factors that caused Marcus to beat the draft and enlist outright at the age of 31 in the Marine Corps. Marcus trained at Parris Island and in Quantico, Virginia for the majority of 1944, and he thrived. He enjoyed the physical training and the camaraderie with his fellow Marines. He played football with popular college players who were now in the service, and was even crowned the boxing champ of his barracks. He felt young again. His confidence and maturity drew his comrades to him. Since these men were in their late teens and early 20s, they took to calling Marcus the Old Man. His maturity and leadership qualities evident, 2 months after his enlistment in November of 1943, Marcus made Private First Class. In September 1944, Marcus received orders shipping his unit to the Pacific Theater. He knew he was destined for combat.
Closing in on Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima, the 5th United States Marine Division fires on Japanese gun emplacements studding the mountain.
Marcus, part of the 3rd Marine Division, landed on the island of Iwo Jima on the 24th of February, 1945, 6 days after the initial landing on the 19th. He was a surveyor, or forward observer, tasked with identifying enemy positions and relaying their coordinates to artillery units who would fire on them, making him well acquainted with explosions. He was in combat. No matter one's age or maturity level, every man is trying to survive. Iwo was particularly gruesome. It was the only battle in the Pacific War where the casualties of the Marines, both killed and wounded, outnumbered the Japanese. It was the only battle he fought. He was rendered unfit for service, having become deaf in his right ear as a result of the battle. He was officially discharged in January 1946. He returned home at the rank of sergeant. In the post-war boom, while other veterans on the GI Bill bought houses or went to school, Marcus and his family were not readily in a position to utilize those benefits that appealed to younger men. The only benefit Marcus ever took advantage of was having the Marine Corps pay for his hearing aids in his later years. Instead, the old man went back to painting windows, but only for a short time. 4 years after the war, he moved to Indiana, where he spent the rest of his life as a successful casket salesman. He never talked about Iwo Jima. Though he was a great conversational personality, he never brought up his combat experience. He didn't want to upset anybody, he said. Nor did he stay in contact with any of the men in his unit. He befriended other veterans, those of his age. The only person he confided in was his older brother, Charles, but those conversations are lost to history. But that was Marcus. What was there to talk about? It was just another job. He only knew how to deal with things like an adult. From taking care of 2 families as a teenager, then his men in the service, and eventually his grandchildren. He was always the old man. I never met him. He died in 1997, when I was an infant, at the age of 86. But in many ways, he was probably much older than that.